I've had a great time in York this week. I used to live up this way and moved south for work, but I've come back for a week and it's just been lovely catching up with so many people. And a real fluke, I caught up with one of my old mates from Australia. Yeah, well, I started out in radio in Australia. I went to radio school there. And one of our lecturers, a bloke called Phil McNabb, he emailed me the other day and he said, we're travelling round Britain. Don't suppose you're going to be in York tomorrow, are you? Like, bizarrely, yes, I am going to be in York. So we went out for a lovely dinner the other night, and he told me a great story. His name's McNabb. He's Australian, but obviously his ancestors are Scottish, and he'd just come back from checking out the old ancestral home in Scotland, and he was telling me he was in this big hall and there were all these portraits of all the McNabbs, of all his ancestors going way, way back, and he looked at them all and he noticed one of them was cross-eyed, and he couldn't work that out because, well, it was a painting. It wasn't a photograph. In fact, when it was done, they didn't even have photography. And he's thinking, well, surely the artist could have fixed that. All right, you might be cross-eyed in real life, but, you know, the artist, you pay them. Surely they give you what you want. After 10 o'clock, Russell Walker's going to be here.
Hello
Morning,
there.
Russell.
Lovely to be with you as always. I'm going to catch up with one of the greatest comedy writers we've ever had. His name's David Nobbs. And David wrote, The Fall and Rise of Reginald Perrin.
Great show. Great show.
He got his first real big break was David Frost hiring him to come on and write for That Was the Week That Was. So he sat around a table with pre-Monty Python, but all of the Monty Python boys. You got the two Ronnies over the other side. You got David Frost. And so he would work there for a few days of the week, coming up with the cutting edge of satire, and then he'd disappear off and he'd write for Leonard Rossiter, or he'd write gags for Frankie Howard, or he'd write entire monologues for people. He's worked with everybody, and he's written the words that made audiences laugh. His books are fantastic. He's actually doing a tour. It's his first one on his own right, where he's going to go around and talk about some of the remarkable people that he worked with. And it's just brilliant. It's coming to sort of 3 or 4 dates across North Yorkshire, like Selby's going to be at the Helmsley Arts Centre, so we catch up with David Nobbs, a truly brilliant man.
I can't wait to hear that. Just the fact that he worked with David Frost, especially now that
exactly.
Frost has passed away.
He's never really spoken much about David Frost,
yeah.
So, I mean, he will be doing a large part of his show, will be talking, obviously, about being there at the invention of satire, which you imagine is pretty major.
They reckon at the time, in the 60s, David Frost was so powerful, he used to drive a convertible car around London, and it had a big button on the dashboard, and if it started to rain, he could push the button, and it would stop raining. They reckon David Frost was that powerful.
He was.
At the heart of North Yorkshire,
Graham Mack,
BBC Radio York.
It is Halloween, so I'm looking for your scary story. Real stories, though. The scariest thing that ever happened to you. Hi to Sam, who says she was driving down a country road at night in the middle of nowhere. Suddenly, a cheeseburger hit the windscreen. She has no idea where it came from. Scared the blinking life out of her. Goodness me. It's the most unusual one so far. Ghost of someone who died from a heart complaint?
At the heart of North Yorkshire,
Graham Mack,
BBC Radio York.
Well, we're a little under half an hour away from the latest Fire Brigades Union strike. The main concern tonight is for bonfire parties taking place in the lead-up to Tuesday's November the 5th bonfire night. And the walkout starts at 6:30 until 11 p.m. tonight. It's part of a continuing row over pensions. Further action is planned for Monday morning, that's the 4th, between 6 and 8 in the morning. Dave McCabe is the area manager and head of risk for North Yorkshire Fire and Rescue. He expects the impact to be limited.
We're in the fortunate position this evening of we've got 26 of our normal 46 fire engines on duty, so we've got over half of our resources available to us. So we're going to try and provide as normal service as possible. However, it might take a little bit longer.
Which firefighters are working then?
Which firefighters? Well, it's impossible to name them all, but our county is covered by over 700 firefighters, and with 50% of those being full-time and 50% of those being retained part-time firefighters. And the majority of our response this evening will indeed be provided by our part-time staff, the retained firefighters that we rely on to look after their communities.
So a reduction in personnel of around 50% then?
It's not quite 50%. We've got more than half of our staff working this evening.
Okay, so if someone is having a bonfire party tonight, is that a good idea?
Well, personally, I would say put off your bonfire party until tomorrow, and if you do have to have one, even if it is tomorrow, make sure it's safe, make provisions so that you can look after your party, as it were.
So tonight is not the night?
Tonight is not the night, really.
Are you advising, if someone sees someone letting off fireworks and that, someone to go up to them and say, hey, you might want to watch that, the fire brigade are not fully covered tonight?
I would advise that whoever's using fireworks or setting bonfires takes their own precautions. You know, dealing with other people on the street like that, maybe that's not something I would recommend, no.
Away from bonfire night and fireworks, what about normal precautions? Would you recommend that we go out for a meal or a takeaway rather than use the kitchen tonight?
Well, it's interesting, speaking to other radio presenters today, that we talked about chip pans and sort of people coming home late and said having chips for tea. I would recommend, have a pizza, take a pizza home with you, because we all know that chip pans have been source of fires in the past. So a safer way of doing it would be to take a takeaway, yes.
Now, the strike starts in a little over an hour. Any idea what the response will be likely from the firefighters that are on strike? They're not going to be picketing fire stations, are they?
Some firefighters might indeed choose to picket fire stations, and that can be both a positive thing for us and a negative thing. It's not a good thing to see that happening, because everybody's reminded of the fact that the fire service isn't available normally. But the good thing for that is there are firefighters who, whilst providing a picket, will also provide a response to a life risk incident. So that, you know, there are good things and bad things in all of those situations.
You're the area manager and head of risk for the North Yorkshire Fire and Rescue Service. Do you think the firefighters' timing on this is a little bit irresponsible?
The firefighters have a legitimate right to take industrial action if they feel necessary. My job in this, as you say, as the head of risk management, is to ensure that we have as big a response as possible during the period of industrial action. So, as I said before, you know, having more than half our resources available is not the best situation, but it's certainly of some comfort to us.
But the Friday night before bonfire night, of all nights.
Yes, the timing of it is unfortunate, but as I say, they're exercising their right to do that, and our response to that is to make sure that we exercise our statutory obligation to provide a response.
Is there anything people should do differently if there is an emergency situation, or is it the regular system, 999?
It's the regular system. If you need the fire service, you ring 999, and we will provide a response as soon as we can.
Thank you very much for that. What are you doing tonight? You going out for tea?
I'm in the control room, Graham, just making sure that the citizens of North Yorkshire are safe.
Dave McCabe, Area Manager and Head of Risk for North Yorkshire Fire and Rescue. It's Halloween and you might be hiding tonight because you don't want a knock on the door. Of course, the scariest person you could find knocking on your door is someone who tells you, you know what, I'm not just a Jehovah's Witness, I sell double glazing as well. I'm Graham Mack on All Saints Day. Former 80s pop star with the Communards, the Reverend Richard Coles, has written a second instalment of his Lives of Saints book. When I spoke to him about the book, I mentioned how most of the saints, their lives had an unhappy ending.
They all have a happy ending in that saints are guaranteed their place in heaven, indeed so securely that they assure us of it even while they're on earth. That's the good news. The bad news is that sometimes they go through rather difficult moments before.
That's
they
understating it, isn't it?
Well, yes, but I don't want to lose sight of the fact that it is ultimately a happy ending, even if it is it's always darkest before the dawn, as they say.
Okay, so what qualifies someone to be a saint?
Well, I think it's someone who people look at and all of a sudden see that they live as if they're citizens of heaven, even though they're still on earth. Sometimes, they're persuaded of that by their courage under pressure, their stoicism, their patience, sometimes just through sheer goodness, and sometimes just through sheer weirdness. What's your favourite, then? Weird one? Well, there's lots and lots of them. I'm very fond of St. Benedict Labre at the moment, who was a chap. He ended up in Rome in the 18th century, late 18th century, where he lived as a beggar and went from church to church, where he'd fall into ecstasies. But when he did, he used to levitate up to the ceiling, and the vergers really liked it because it meant they could sweep under him rather than round him. So he was very popular with the church cleaners.
How do we know this is all true?
Well, we don't. We have the stories, and the stories, all the stories are concerned with telling a truth, and the truth is that they believe that this person was particularly holy. They use the tools at their disposal to do that, and then over the years the stories perhaps get added to, enriched, coloured in, and we end up with sometimes some very implausible and unlikely stories. I suppose they would have made sense to people a long time ago, but to us they seem to make no sense at all. But that's kind of interesting too. There's a sort of poetry about them sometimes, which I find rather moving.
And so you can be a saint in your own lifetime?
Well, yes. There's a sort of rule now. If you're going to be, if you want to be technical about it, the Roman Catholic Church, if it's making saints, you have to sort of be dead, and normally dead for a fair while before they'll even consider the process, although they're rushing a couple through at the moment. But actually, quite a lot of saints were acknowledged by people who lived near them and around them in their lifetimes to be of spectacular holiness. But it's really after they die that they become legends, if you see what I mean.
Is there a patron saint of radio presenters?
There is, actually. It's St. Gabriel.
Mm-hmm.
Remember, who came with the news to the Virgin Mary that she was about to give birth to a child, even though she'd not gone through the normal procedure. So I'm sure you're just as startling in your broadcasting, and that's...
Well, if there was something as big a deal as that, you'd know about it on BBC Radio York.
You certainly would.
We wouldn't miss a big story like that now, would we?
I wouldn't think you'd dream of it, no.
Are we all called to be saints?
Yes, we are. I think God wants us all to be saints, and it's really a matter for us as to how far we're prepared to collaborate with God in that process. Some are more ready than others.
This is your second book on the topic, Reverend. How many saints are there?
Even the most indefatigable of readers might be dismayed to learn that there are thousands and thousands and thousands of them. I mean, more than have ever been counted, actually. So I've only really dipped my bucket into the shallows of the tradition, but I have pulled out one or two exotic creatures, I think.
Yeah, like who?
Well, I mean, there's all sorts. St. Notburger I'm fond of at the moment, who's the patron saint of knife throwers, because she threw a sickle in the air to persuade a farmer that she should be allowed to go to Mass, and it hovered miraculously. That's good. There's Francis of Paola. I like him very much. He had a pet fish that he was very fond of, but unfortunately a priest pinched it and fried it for his lunch. The fish was called Antonella, by the way.
Okay.
But Paola reconstituted Antonella from fragments and put her back in the pond, and she swam around joyously singing a hymn.
Any truth in the rumour that St. Michael is the patron saint of chain stores and St. Valentine is the patron saint of florists?
There's absolutely no truth in either of those two. But, I mean, you could anyone can choose anyone to be their patron saint.
Can they really?
Yes, I quite happily... I don't think that Notburger has ever formally been declared a patron saint of knife throwers, but the business with the sickle persuades me that it fits.
Yes, yeah. Okay, so how will you be celebrating All Saints' Day?
Well, actually, rather soberly and in a proper fashion. We have a special service to mark it in church, in which we will be reflecting on and praying with the saints from the riches of our tradition.
Reverend Richard Coles, thank you so much.
Thanks very much.
There you go. That was more fun than performing with the Communards, wasn't it?
Way more fun. Not paid as well, but hey ho.
At the heart of North Yorkshire,
Ray and Mack.
BBC Radio York.